thing is, I do believe there was talk about these things. I believe if we study history, the Confederates were able to shoot pterodactyls, back in the Civil War, and they spread these things out. Anybody can look it up online.
Google it
They
yourself.
spread these things out, and this is a historical fact. So, they spread this thing out, and it's got a huge winglet. It was a pterodactyl they shot. So, of course, these things have been around. Now, they went extinct, obviously, slowly, but surely. And so,
what I'm saying is Jesus wrote a dinosaur to work. That's history. It's in the Bible. How to Train Your Dragon.
Historical facts.
And if you don't believe it, do your own research. Pull up Google. You'll find the picture, I promise.
Oh my God.
Thank you, John Gleason, godless engineer, for gifting me this beautiful moment. Y'all remember when they tried to cancel Steven Spielberg for posing with an animatronic triceratops animal rights activist?
Back it up.
Hit it from the back.
Cloaca. Historical facts.
Eat my ass, BP. You're down here bailing on the rest of us because you don't want to process your grief and shame like a normal person by drinking and mistreating strangers.
No, Rick. It is you who must nibble my cloaca, or bird asshole.
Everyone knows what a cloaca is.
back in the Civil War, and they spread these things out. Anybody can look it up online. They spread these things out, and this is a historical fact. So, they spread this thing out, and it's got a huge winglet. It was a pterodactyl they shot. So, of course, these things have been around. Now, they went extinct, obviously, slowly, but surely. And so,
Paul Bunyan was sharing some Funyuns with his pet velociraptor.
Whoa.
Oh, you thought it was an ox? Roll back the clock. Let me knock the socks off. Historical facts.
I didn't cut out. You heard me. Are you a pervert or something? Okay.
I can't hear you.
I'm muted.
There we go. Okay.
I was talking to everybody and I was on mute.
It's like, wait, we were just chatting. I step away for a minute.
Yeah. So I was just telling everybody, what's up, heathens? How y'all doing? So tonight we're going to be talking with Captain Dadpool, and I know you got a kind of an announcement sort of thing to make there. So I don't know. Do you want to tell everybody like who you are, what you do?
Yeah. Sorry, I seem a bit frazzled. I just got my kids to bed, which is always a nightmare. So give me a second to become a human again. Yeah. So probably most people know me from TikTok. I have a YouTube channel as well. I interview scholars and other people every week on there, every Sunday. I have a Patreon, Twitter, Discord, Instagram, all that good stuff. So yeah, follow me, like, and subscribe, I guess.
Definitely. I do believe that Dadpool, all of his stuff is in the description there. You can subscribe to him here on YouTube, follow him on Twitter, and you're on Twitch too now.
Yeah. I haven't done a stream since I just made affiliate on Twitch, and I haven't done a stream since then.
Oh, wow. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. It's not that big of a deal. You only have to stream like 8 hours or something to do it. And I finally did it, and haven't streamed since. That was like 3 weeks ago. Getting a schedule down is rough.
Yeah. No, I totally understand that. I don't know. I remember getting the Twitch reports from when I would stream. And I think you got to do the 8 hours, but you also have to like stream on 7 different days. And then you got to have at least an average of like 3 like viewers per stream or whatnot. So I'm sure that was pretty easy for you to get.
I think it was like you need like 100 subscribers, and you
Yeah.
have to stream 7 days a month, a total of 8 hours. So it's easy to do, and this is just staying with it.
Yeah. All right. So to get into our discussion tonight, I know you kind of wanted to start off talking about something. So I'll let you have the floor.
I appreciate that. Yeah, this is rough because this is a big change in my perspective that I'm announcing tonight. I've toyed with this idea for a while, especially a year ago, and I kind of left it on the side, and now I've been rethinking things for the past couple months. I'm talking about the mythicist position. I used to joke and say that I was an on the fenceicist, but I've never fully committed to it. I read, Carrier's book. I got it right here above my head. It's got a whole bunch of highlighters in it and shit. And but I started reading Bart Ehrman a lot, and a bunch of others. And then I just kind of abandoned the mythicist thing. And then I started thinking more about it. And I think I'm ready to announce I'm a mythicist now. I don't think Jesus ever existed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I've tried. I've thought about it very long and hard. I've done a lot of research on both sides, and yeah, I don't know. I was just came to this conclusion.
So what was the thing that kind of broke the straw that broke the camel's back, so to say?
A big issue for me was, all right, we've always heard about Flavius Josephus who wrote the Testimonium Flavium, or Testimonium Flavianum. His father, which he writes a lot about his father, right? In his writings, he wrote a lot about his dad. He loved his dad, and his father was he was a priest in the Temple of Galilee during Jesus's life. He never wrote about Jesus. Why is it? That's weird. If there's a guy walking around performing miracles, claiming to be God in the flesh, you'd think somebody would have written about him. Well, here we have a guy like he never wrote anything about him. That doesn't make any sense to me. So yeah, this is kind of like the point I've been pondering a lot lately. And I just can't make the evidence fit. So I don't think Jesus ever existed. I'm still working on where to go from that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so like, do you go, I guess maybe the full 9 and say that this is the one thing that destroys all of Christianity?
No, it's not the one thing that destroys Christianity. I mean, to me, Christianity is incredibly unsustainable from its foundation for a multitude of reasons. You want to talk about the virgin birth. There's all kinds of problems with that. The different genealogies in Jesus, the fact that we don't have any eyewitness testimony to any things he did, the fact that our earliest accounts are 20, 30, 40, 50 years after his death. The manuscripts we have are 250, 300 years after the events that they record. It's just sketchy, man. It's really sketchy. There's no way that Christianity can sustain itself. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
I'm still trying to get my
center yourself.
Yeah. Maybe the beer will help.
Yeah. So if anybody's curious as to what I'm drinking tonight, this is Bud Light Next. Need something that's
the
close
fuck
to water?
That?
Get Bud Light Next.
Bud Light next to water.
Bud Light next to water.
Bud Light next to nothing.
Yeah. So basically, if you want something that's 0 carbs, tastes just a little bit off from water, Bud Light next.
So it's like water with a tiny bit of piss in it. Not your normal amount of piss, just a little bit this time.
Yeah.
It's diet piss.
It's diet piss. Yeah. It was not hashtag not sponsored by Bud Light next, but maybe I can get a sponsorship. I mean, maybe. I'm waiting for Bud Light to be like, we like that redneck fuck to really sponsor us.
Yeah. I'm drinking Yingling, which is local to Pennsylvania, which, where I live. So I would love to sponsor Yingling. Their beer is amazing.
Yeah. All right. If people couldn't tell in the chat, it was just a little bit of an April Fool's thingy with Captain Dadpool being
yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah.
I had y'all going. Admit it. I had y'all going. No, I'm not a mythicist.
No, we're definitely on opposite sides of this issue now, because you were an on the fenceist or whatever for a while, and then you came to the conclusion that he probably did exist, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I came to that conclusion because that's what makes the most sense to me as to what everything happened. Occam's razor type thing.
Well, I mean, so let me, if I could start off by asking this: what is your understanding of Occam's razor?
The simplest explanation is usually the most correct, or the explanation with the least amount of moving parts is usually correct.
Yeah, well, I mean, generally how I like to think of it in the context of this is the position or the explanation with the least amount of assumptions is more likely to be the correct conclusion or explanation. And so I don't know. I don't see for me, I don't see how the historicist's view of things is less ad hoc than the mythicist view of things. So I don't know. I'll pose the same question that I'd posed to you during the whole April Fool's thing. Was there any one thing that really kind of made it click in your mind that, oh, he probably did exist?
Yeah. Well, first it's interesting you say that the one with the least amount of assumptions, because it seems from my perspective, the mythicist is the one who has the most assumptions. The mythicist position is the one that dismisses the most amount of evidence that we have for the existence of a historical figure named Jesus. I'm sure you'll want to respond to that, but the I wish I had time to think about this question. I think for me, it's how did Christianity begin without a figure like Jesus? Because you have the writings of Paul. First Thessalonians is chronologically the very first book in the Bible. Paul cites, you're well. By the way, everyone, I pretty much already know everything what John's going to say. He probably pretty much knows everything that I'm going to say in this discussion. So there's not much new information to say on this topic, I don't think. But here we are anyway, discussing amongst friends.
Well, I don't know. I mean, so you say that mythicists just dismiss as if we don't have good reason, or that we don't have explanations for the things that we're quote unquote dismissing. Right. And I don't find myself just outright dismissing things. I feel like there are certain arguments that historicists bring up that I can explain better than their particular explanation. So I'm is there one example of something that mythicists seem to just dismiss out of hand?
It's kind of the entire thing, John, because the mythicism was not a thing until the 18th century during the Enlightenment movement, right? And it was started.
That's because nobody cared about the historicity of the faith,
Well, yeah,
until that point. So
there's
I
some
mean,
truth to that.
there's no point to say, oh, Jesus was only ever a myth, because they didn't care if he was historical or if he wasn't. They like even the early church fathers, they only cared about the theological truth of Christianity. They didn't care about the historical truth.
Well, I would push back on that because Christianity had a lot of critics in the first few centuries of its life. None of those critics said that this person didn't exist. Best example is, Jesus Christ, his name escapes me. Celsus, sorry. Celsus was a 2nd century Greek philosopher. He was like Christianity's like most intellectual, studious critic. He wrote a lot, and he wrote a very long book that we don't have anymore, but it is quoted very extensively by Origen, who wrote a book called Against Celsus. Now, Origen does us a huge favor, and he quotes probably most of this book. It's like 300 pages long, and it's chapter by chapter, and he responds to Celsus's arguments kind of point by point. It's like chapter 1, Celsus says this, but well, here's the thing, blah, 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 blah. In chapter 2, he also goes on to say this big quote from his book, and here's his rebuttal. And what we learn about that book is Celsus is mocking the person of Jesus. Like, oh, you worship a man who was crucified. You worship a peasant. This was not a god. This was not an emperor. This was a peasant who was executed by his, and you worship that guy? Really? He never said this person that didn't exist. He mocked them for worshiping that guy. So yeah, the first mention of Jesus never existing as a literal person, again, didn't come until the Enlightenment period.
Well, see, that really doesn't matter as far as this particular discussion goes. Like whenever his historicity started to be questioned, I mean, I really don't think that has any kind of bearing on
if Jesus never existed. Don't you think Christianity's earliest critics would have pointed that out?
Earliest critic. Can you name me an early critic before Jesus was historicized?
Celsus not count?
No, because you yourself said Celsus was in the 2nd century. I believe he's like what later half of the 2nd century.
Late century, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you have the Gospels that are in circulation amongst the Christian community for 100 years, at least for the earliest Gospel. So I mean, yeah, Celsus would not count because he grew up in an era where Christians were using the Gospels, were believing in the Gospels, and believing that they were historicized. Much like most of the secular sources that supposedly prove Jesus existed, they were written at a time when they were regurgitating what Christians were saying.
Yeah, right. Like Pliny the Younger, etc.
Yeah.
What about, so like I was saying earlier, Paul starts writing about Jesus 20 years early, and he cites pre-Pauline literature in 1 Corinthians 15, Philippians chapter 2. And there were Christians Christianity existed before Paul's conversion. Most scholars date Paul's conversion to about 5 or 10 years after Jesus' death. And there's a variety of reasons they say that I can't go into because I'm not smart enough. But and then you have, okay, not only do you have the Gospels, you probably don't hold to the Q source theory or the M or L source theory, but that's what scholars hold to because that makes sense. Like take Mark does not have the Beatitudes. Matthew and Luke do have the Beatitudes. That's where this idea of the Q source comes from. The picture I'm trying to paint here is there is a lot of different places where this person's being written about. How was he not a real person that was just deified and blown out of proportion after his death?
Would you agree that the Q source, I don't. You're right. I don't hold to the whole Q idea. It seems like the simplest explanation for all that is that of course, Mark was written first. Matthew copies Mark, and then Luke copies Matthew and Mark because he had both of them.
Oh, yeah. Mark Goodacre thing.
Well, yeah, but it's not. I don't know why people only want to tie this like to just one person. There's multiple people.
Yeah, there is. He makes the most compelling arguments for it, though. That's why I say that.
Okay, well, because it's Michael Golder, Mark Goodacre, of course, Richard Carrier also agrees with the both of them. But I mean, there's a multitude. Like it's only grown, this rejection of the Q hypothesis. And the thing that I don't like about the Q hypothesis is that it's a completely fabricated source.
Yeah.
Like it's made up, and you cannot, like, here's one thing that Bart Ehrman says that I just am really flabbergasted that he says it. He says that Q, M, and L are independent sources that inform the Gospels. You literally cannot know that because we don't have those sources. We don't have, we can't critically analyze them. And so there's no way that you can say that those are independent sources, like they're independent of each other, or they're independent from, some other previous source that was just made up out of whole cloth. And then another thing is that you cannot discern, you can't discern between Matthew and Luke just making stuff up, which we know authors do, even historians, ancient historians at the time. And this is something that Bart Ehrman even agrees with. Yeah. Ancient historians just made things up. So you can't really discern what's made up and between that and what might have actually been in those documents.
Sorry, can you repeat literally all that? I'm kidding.
No, that's okay. Yeah,
I heard you.
Okay. Go ahead.
Keep going.
Oh, okay. Well, so that's why I don't hold to that. It seems like going back to Occam's razor, you have to speculate and ad hoc tack on these supposed sources that are independent, which account for the whole multiple attestation of this figure. And so, throwing out ad hoc sources, you have the Gospels, right? And the Gospels are all based off of Mark. Mark bases some of his theology and everything like that off of Paul's work. And so as far as independent testimony goes, the only thing that you have is Paul. And nowhere, like in Paul, you have ambiguous verses, but I think the ambiguity works against the historical position because you can't use those to suggest that, Paul talked about a historical Jesus. Now, I don't think that it necessarily proves the mythicist hypothesis that Paul thought that Jesus was purely mythical or purely not mythical, but purely celestial. But I think that the stronger case can be made to explain those ambiguous verses with the understanding that Paul considered Jesus to be a celestial figure, only ever a celestial figure.
But
so
Paul says Jesus was born of a woman. How does he?
That's Galatians 4:4. That's wrapped up in an allegory. And it's multiply, and it is. Come on. Come on. What I mean,
how is Paul using an allegory? You have to make it an allegory. He literally
says that he's using an allegory. He says this is an allegory. The allegory is that Jesus was made flesh, quote unquote, born of a woman or whatnot, to have Judaic flesh, which I think that he did have a flesh and blood body. It was just a celestial body that was manufactured by God. And if you look at the Greek, that's exactly what that's the words that Paul uses better fits a manufactured understanding rather than an actual born of type of thing. But the allegory is that born into the flesh, born into sin, and then when he dies and resurrects, that's when he's sinless, And so it's to explain that sort of transition from a sinful body to a pure sinless body. And I mean, he says it in at the very end of chapter 3 of Galatians, that, you know, this is an allegory. Right. And then later on in Galatians 4, he also says this is an allegory.
It was an allegory that he was born of a woman or even manufactured of a woman. It's a weird allegory. That's fine.
I mean, Paul's a weird dude.
No argument there. So how do you see? Here's my problem with the mythicist position. It's not so much that the argument is that Jesus didn't exist as a person. Like, if you want to believe that, if that's what you think, that's fine. My problem is what usually comes after that. What usually comes after that is a bunch of just fucking batshit crazy conspiracy theories. Like, God, his name escapes me. Caesar's Messiah.
Atwill.
Joseph Atwill. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
How did this happen?
Well, just
soon after the events.
Right. Well, for one thing, we don't know about, we don't have a firm date for Jesus's supposed crucifixion. People speculate about it, but we don't really have any kind of firm dates. We don't have any records of Jesus being put to death, or even given an exact time in which Jesus was put to death. But all we really have evidence of is that the belief arose that, you know, Jesus died. And not saying that any of this happened on earth, but that he died, he was buried, and he resurrected. And according to Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, it was all because the scripture said that would happen, when he says according to the scriptures.
Yeah, as the scriptures say, yeah.
Yeah. So, crap, I was going to mention, the crank stuff. Okay, I think that we can come to an agreement on something with this, because there is a lot of crank mythicism out there. Okay. Yeah. And I totally agree with that. The Flavian Christ, Caesar's Messiah, like all of that kind of stuff is crazy crank shit. And I definitely agree, but I don't hold to those, and I don't support those. And I always like combat those whenever I see them being pushed. I laugh at them just like you do. And so I'm not sure what you mean, what comes after, other than like the crazy mythicist arguments out there. But I mean, I follow, I not follow, but I agree with, Raphael Lataster's conclusion on this being agnosticism. He says that we either can't know, or we, you don't know whether or not Jesus existed. But I also lean towards he probably didn't exist, along with Richard Carrier. Now, those two books are peer reviewed in the scholarship. Yeah. And just to put this out, this question is being debated currently in the scholarship, because there's not been a coherent rebuttal of either of those books. It seems like all of the rebuttals to them proclaim to have read the books, but they actually have not. And it's pretty evident by the things that they claim. Like, for instance, Bart Ehrman, he obviously has never read a single piece of mythicist material, peer-reviewed mythicist material, because in his debate, the one debate that he did on this particular subject up in Milwaukee,
with Robert Price.
The first,
with Robert Price.
That guy.
That guy. Fuck that guy.
The one of the arguments that he pulled out to refute, as far as like representing mythicism, was this idea that Nazareth didn't exist. That is not a serious argument against the historicity of Jesus, because it's not a serious argument, because whether or not Nazareth existed, Jesus still could have existed and done the things that he did. So obviously the whole Nazareth argument is doesn't matter to the entire discussion. So, but he said several other things that has indicated that he just simply does not know at all, like any actual mythicist point. They seem to hang on crank mythicists and representing crank mythicism as the only kind of mythicism. So I guess my question is, do you recognize that there are scholars in related fields and directly in historical fields that have written in an academic setting, been peer reviewed and published, that come away questioning the historicity of Jesus?
Oh yeah, I can't deny that. I mean, again, I got
Okay.
fucking Carrie's book right here.
Well, yeah. Some people like to just dismiss Carrier and try to attack the peer review process that he.
Well, it's
went
because he's
through.
not a professor. He's not teaching at any university or anything.
Why does that matter?
That I agree with that. I don't think it does matter, unless there's some credential that he needs that they won't let him teach. I don't know. But
Well, as far as my
obviously
understanding,
he's an intelligent guy. He's
Yeah.
done his homework, so it doesn't matter to me whether he teaches at a university or not.
good. I'm glad. I'm glad.
Yeah, that doesn't matter to me. All right, so let's go back to the point.
Okay.
So within 70 years of Jesus' supposed death, you have like almost a dozen different sources, not including the Gospels, that mention Jesus as a real person. How did, to me, the idea of Jesus being an apocalyptic preacher that they believed to be the Messiah, because is not weird, because that was not uncommon. There are several other apocalyptic figures. Jesus ben Sahar or Sadir, I forget his name. The Egyptian that Paul says that he was accused of being, that did similar things. So it makes sense to me that Jesus was one of these figures. He was just deified after his death the same way that Roman emperors were. So then how did they just come up, or who just came up with this person and started walking around telling everybody in ancient Rome, hey, there's this guy and he's God in the flesh? Trust me, bro. How did that start the origins of Christianity?
Well, so first I have to ask, like, what are the 12 sources that talk about?
Yeah,
it
that's back
about?
to the, Paul, 1 Corinthians 15, Philippians 2, Q, M, and L, which you disagree with. So we'll
Okay,
say
well,
we'll say multiple sources. We won't say more than.
Well, I mean, if you're counting Q, M, and L, that brings us down to 9 sources in the first century. You've got Paul, that's one source. Get rid of the Gospels because they're based on Paul's work, so they're not independent.
Wait, you said the Gospels are based on Paul's words?
Well, Mark is based on Paul's writings and theology, and so that means that they're all based on that.
I would disagree with that.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I know that I can bring up a list of scholars.
Oh, I'm sure you can. You're gonna be able to do that.
My
no
point.
what.
Well, I mean, my point is that this isn't just me saying it. Multiple scholars in the field are saying that they're making the connections between Mark's work and Paul's work, because, like, for instance, there are things that Mark says Jesus said that actually Paul said was his own opinion. So I don't understand how Jesus could have actually said those things, but then Paul is like, oh, but I this is my opinion. This is not Jesus's command. This is my opinion. And then in Mark, it pops up as Jesus's command, or Jesus telling people.
Are you referring to the verse about divorce? Paul
I
quote?
believe that it's divorce. It's been like a couple weeks since I've
Yeah.
read the summary of the evidence. I think it might be divorce.
Yeah,
But that's not the only piece of evidence. Like there's multiple layers to it. Like there's multiple pieces of evidence that it's kind of hard to ignore all of them together.
I'd have to look into that, but my knee jerk reaction is this might be a case of parallelomania.
I mean, I granted, I mean that is something that happens, but when you're looking at parallels, I mean, of course, you're looking for, just random things that you pull out and random facts that you can seem to kind of connect. But when it's parallels that are in the exact same order and in the exact same number and all this other stuff, where it just can't be coincidence. That's how I understand how to determine between actual parallels between two works and just mere coincidence. So I definitely suggest looking into it, and I can give you like a whole list of not only Carrier, by the way, just so you know, it's a whole list of scholars that have written things on the connections between the two. So I can get that to you like after the show or something if you're still interested.
Yeah, that's fine.
But so I'm just telling you my view of it. So we've got Paul as a source, and since we can't, in my view, we can't use Mark, Matthew, Luke, or John. Because all the Gospels use the previous Gospels to them.
Yeah, fuck John. Anyone named John is a fucking idiot.
Thank you. So we've got Paul writing in the first century, and so really, in my view, and feel free to disagree, but in my view, we've only got the one source for Jesus, and that's Paul's writings in the Bible. And I remember you saying that it's a totally ridiculous position to just toss the Bible out, because it's the Bible, in that you can't have any like historical.
Because it's a biased source, so ignore it completely.
Right, I don't agree with that because obviously Paul's writings are in the Bible, and so I mean that's obviously. Our own, well, for me at least, that's the only independent source that talks about Jesus. Now I do toss out the Gospels, but that's because I don't think that there's really a reliable way to determine between historical facts and just made up stuff like mythological, legendary, like things that were piled on. I don't think that you can really discern between the two.
Yeah, I for the most part agree with that. The only real help that the Gospels are in constructing who Jesus was is maybe by saying that he was from Nazareth and some of the things that he supposedly said. Because a lot of those phrases can also be found in the Gospel of Thomas, and most scholars say that Thomas is independent from the Gospels, even though it was later than the Gospels, even later than John, the early 2nd century, I think. And
I don't see how it can be like independent of the Gospels, like
because it has so much in it that is not in the other Gospels, but it has some things that are.
Well, that just sounds like the other Gospels.
Well, to me, it sounds like there was a source floating around that everybody was using.
Well, I mean that there may well have been, but I mean you can't. I mean that's just because that's still pure speculation about it.
That's also how literature worked in the ancient world. Like you read the Gnostic Gospels, right? The Gnostic Gospels are written by taking a passage or a few verses from one of the Synoptic Gospels and making an entire gospel out of that. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene is like that. Gospel of Judas is like this. The Apocalypse of Adam, the Wisdom of Sophia is like this. All these entire gospels written out of one little passage. That's how literature worked back then. So it's not weird that they had this source and they all like made their own story out of it. Again, yeah, this is all just an assertion, but
right. But I mean, why can't
weird if you understand?
Why can't it? Well, it seems to me like I don't know. It kind of seems a bit special pleading to me, because why can't the source just have been, one of the gospels that we do have, or one of the obviously fabricated gospels that we no longer have? One of my favorite ones that Bart Ehrman actually in one of his books talked about, it was a little dirty, kind of a skinemaxy for Jesus. So I know you got kids around. I don't want to say anything, but I guess no, that's fine. I guess I just I don't understand like why it has to be some like new independent source. If it does have some things that are in the existing gospels, then why couldn't it just have been one of the existing gospels?
So what would be the existing gospel other than Mark? Because going again, the book of Thomas has things in it that align with Matthew and Luke, but are not in Mark. So that makes it seem like that's one reason scholars think that Thomas used an independent source.
No, well, but if Thomas was written later, which I don't know the dating like of Thomas or whatnot,
like early
but
second century.
Okay.
There's some there's a few verses that scholars think can actually be traced back to an earlier source prior to the gospel, but that's a whole other thing. It's a collection of sayings of Jesus, obviously, for those who didn't know, that were gathered together and compiled in this gospel.
Well, so if the Gospel of Thomas was written at like in the 2nd century after John's gospel, I mean he could have just had Luke and Matthew's gospels.
Well,
wouldn't that be a lot easier of an explanation than creating some floating unknown other gospel?
Well, no, because it uses the same some of the same verses. It says some things that are completely different, and some of those verses are changed a little bit, or a little bit different. So,
right. So, I mean,
let's move past all that because
okay, it's fine.
We're gonna talk in circles. That's the reason I'm saying that.
Yeah. Okay.
You asked what was the deciding factor for me.
Right.
Here's I had to think about it for a second. Here's what it is. If this person of Jesus was made up out of nowhere, why did they invent a carpenter or a laborer from a small town that was crucified by the Roman government? Why is that what they came up with instead of this mighty powerful person? What?
Okay.
Why did they come up with this? Yeah, this guy that would not meet any of the standards, because the Messiah was supposed to be a king, a ruler. He was supposed to do all these things, but instead they wanted a Messiah. They were very desperate for a Messiah to come and rescue them. So instead of coming up with that, they came up with a guy who was killed by the government in the most embarrassing way possible. By the way.
Okay. So I do have explanations for all this. I'm so glad, because I have little shiny moments and I sort of run off and I start talking about stuff. So as far as like why would they invent this carpenter or whatever? There was very obviously a need for some kind of narrative about the Jesus figure, and obviously Jesus was supposed to come and do a few things. Now we learned from Paul's work that, the only place that he ever got any kind of information about Jesus was from the scriptures and from visions. So you had people that were having visions, which would include Cephas and Paul, at least, and then James the Pillar, who's different than the supposed brother of Jesus, which I completely disagree with, and we can touch on that later if you really want to. But so you had those people that were having visions of the supposed Messiah, and what you end up with is syncretism happening. Basically, first century BCE and first century CE Jews, and then what would later become Jewish Christians, started reinterpreting their scriptures to be more messianic. I don't know how to pronounce this word, messianic.
Messianic, messianic.
Yeah, messianic. So they were reinterpreting them to be more messianic. And so passages that originally were talking about maybe something else, but could also be read as talking about the Messiah, were interpreted to be that way. And we know this through like the Gospels, especially the Gospel of Matthew, because the Gospel of Matthew.
So now you trust the Gospels, huh?
No. It's not that I trust.
I'm just poking at you.
Oh, okay. So the Gospels never cite where they get their information from, right? With the exception of scriptures. You see this at the very beginning of Mark, where they're citing scripture, and then Matthew has the most flagrant references back to scripture. So
Luke claims he gets his information from multiple eyewitnesses, but
well, I mean, the problem with Luke's is that he doesn't name who the eyewitnesses were. He doesn't name like why they would be considered good eyewitnesses. It's just totally.
He's writing to a guy named Theophilus that we are not sure who he is. My favorite theory, by the way, is that he's Paul's lawyer, but that's a whole other topic.
I hadn't heard that one before, but that is interesting.
Yeah.
So that it's fairly obvious that they were reinterpreting scripture to be more messianic. Now, we do also have evidence from Philo of Alexandria of other Jews also doing this, looking to syncretize the Jewish religion with surrounding pagan and Hellenistic ideas. So when Philo of Alexandria is talking about his logos, he actually refers back to a passage in Zechariah where it even names the Messiah Jesus, or Yeshua rather. And so the way that Philo describes this archangel figure that is already existent in Jewish theology, being Yeshua, is amongst many other names, by the way. That there's that, and then what you have is Paul. He describes Jesus in certain ways, and Philo and Paul end up calling this Messiah figure, describing him in the exact same ways. And so Paul has Jesus Christ, obviously. Philo has this Yeshua archangel figure that the Jews already know about. And so what we have here are two different groups of Jews, which, Paul being a Jew, two different groups of Jews are reading out of scripture information about the Messiah, and they have the exact same information, describe this Messiah in exactly the same ways. Obviously, Paul's is the one that takes hold. So it's much more complicated to think that, that Paul and Philo like fabricated this information like independently of the scriptures or something of that nature. That they both independently came to these conclusions because of how they were reading the scriptures. So there's a very strong correlation there between how they were interpreting the scriptures and how Jesus is formed. Now, to get to like why were these historical stories even made up about Jesus? They were made up about Jesus because, one, in my opinion, he never really came and did them, obviously. But two, the Jews did not have a monolithic idea about what the Messiah was to come to do. There were very different groups of Jews that were running around, and we have no idea how wide or how widely they differed. We do know that there were some groups that heavily deviated away from Orthodox Judaism or the standard Judaism or whatnot. So we do know that these groups existed. So all it takes is Paul, being this strict Orthodox Jew, and then basically switching sides to just a different group of Jews who were reading all this stuff as messianic scripture. And then Paul informs the Gospels about this theology. The Gospels are looking to provide this historical narrative about Jesus that fulfills all of the supposed prophecies that they've been reading out of the scriptures. And you can actually tie quite nearly all of them back to the scriptures, like multiple points, like even Jesus's crucifixion, the fact that the Jews were the ones that ultimately caused Jesus's death. You've got the fact that he was the word that's coming to mind is insulted, but basically with the crucifixion being like a very embarrassing kind of death or whatnot. I mean, the way that they were interpreting their scriptures, that had to happen. And all of the miracles that Jesus did, all of those are taken straight out of the Old Testament scriptures. So, I mean, at just about every point in the Gospels, you see how they were crafted to fulfill very specific prophecies that they were reading out of the Old Testament. And each gospel thinks that different sets of these prophecies were the real prophecies about Jesus. That's why you have some different stories in there. They had to, create these stories to show that this Jesus was the Messiah because he fulfills these prophecies. You can find lists out there. I think the current number is like 353 supposed prophecies about Jesus. That's a little overboard in my opinion, obviously coming from the Christian side, but you can obviously see how those are the things that could easily be read as messianic. And so if they can easily be read as messianic, then they probably were at some point, maybe not all of them, but we do know that a subset of them were definitely interpreted to be about the Messiah because of how the Gospels were constructed. And I've been talking way too long. I'll let you.
Fine. I think you're kind of making my point for me. So yeah, my perspective is there was this apocalyptic preacher, Jesus, that his followers believed was the Messiah, the one who was supposed to come, end the wars, unite the tribes, and rule as the king. But obviously that didn't happen. Instead, he was killed, obviously, and crucified. So what happened after that is they were, when Gospels record this, they were mourning. They were like, "What? Why did this happen? Why were they all mourning? Why were they all crying? Because this wasn't supposed to happen. They thought he was going to save them. They thought he was going to be king, and they were going to be on top for a while. They've been oppressed for so long. They were so excited. And then Jesus dies. So then along comes a guy like Paul who is able to use scripture from who is educated in the Old Testament, be like, no, he is the Messiah, you guys. And he starts using Old Testament or quotes from the Old Testament and he literally misquotes the Old Testament. He literally changes words around and removes words completely. I got all this shit written down on how he does this. And then Matthew especially does this because Matthew was written for the Jews. Matthew was written to convert the Jews. Luke was written to convert the Gentiles. That's why Matthew quotes the Old Testament a lot. Luke never does. Matthew quotes Isaiah chapter 7 about the virgin birth. Luke just says Jesus was born of a virgin, never quotes the Old Testament. I think this was done in an effort to show them, no, this guy, who, even though he died, he was the Messiah. Here's why. You can look at this scripture, because they didn't know any better. They couldn't pick up the Old Testament and read it. They were illiterate. So they had to just take people's word for it who could read. Why would they lie to him? Like, hey, yeah, there's this verse in the Old Testament that's talking about this guy that just died. And they were like, oh, so he really was the Messiah. So that's what I think happened.
Well, so there's so I do agree that there were some Jewish sects in the first century that were looking for a more militaristic Messiah to come and reign as like a physical king, like in the area. There definitely was. We have evidence of this in Josephus. You know, he talks about the Egyptian who raised an army, was going to attack him, but you know, ultimately he failed. And you know, it wouldn't surprise me if there were more of these failed messiahs going around at the time. I think that there's a couple more that even Josephus talks about, but you know, it's very obvious that there were groups out there that were interpreting the Messiah to be that. But to act like that was a monolithic view of all Jews, I think is a little far-fetched, and you just don't have that as far as evidence. Like you can't actually substantiate that claim with evidence that they only thought of the Messiah as being that.
No, I never said they only thought. No, there was that ancient Judaism was about as divided as Christianity is today. Like they were constantly at each other's throats.
Okay, so would you then agree that it's more than likely that there was a group of Jews that were reinterpreting the scriptures, you know, before Paul was writing, that you know was reading these scriptures as messianic?
I don't know that there's any evidence of that. I know they disagreed
there's
about
Paul.
how, like, well, yeah, Paul converted.
Well, yeah,
because
but I mean,
because he began to believe that Jesus was blind. I think that Paul is a lot of this kind of boils down to how you feel about Paul. I think Paul genuinely believed what he believed. I don't think he was a fraud. I don't think he was making it up. I think he had a genuine conversion experience, and that's why he converted. And so he believed that because, and fuck, God damn it, what verse is it? Is it in Zechariah or Ezekiel? One of the books with a Z in it. It said that the Jews will lead the Gentiles into closer relationship with the Lord, and at the end of the days. I think Paul believed he was that guy. So the Messiah came, Jesus was the Messiah, and now the next phase is the Jews teach the Gentiles how to more closely follow the Lord. I'll have to look that up if you want to know. So I think Paul thought he was like the next step in that plan because of the conversion experience he had. So because he had that, he felt like he had that obligation. He went to the scriptures and then started changing things and reworking them. I think he genuinely believed what he believed. He was wrong, but
now
he won out in the end. What can I say?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but it kind of seems like you're saying that Paul revised the scriptures himself to talk about them being messianic.
Have you done a side by side comparison of all the Old Testament quotes that Paul quotes? They're very different.
No, I'm not talking about like I'm not talking about, you know, him quoting the Old Testament. I'm just talking about the idea that Paul himself was, you know, reformulating these passages to be prophecies about the Messiah. Like reinterpreting them, not changing their words, but just reinterpreting them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that
that's what he was doing. I think that's what the authors of the Gospels were doing, especially Matthew.
Well, right. I mean, I think that they reinterpreted like the Christians that came before Paul were the ones to reinterpret these passages to be about the Messiah. Like at least they were the first ones to start doing that, because Paul himself says that, you know,
my dog disagrees. If you couldn't hear,
Paul says that he got, you know, or that there were Christians before him, right? And then when he in 1 Corinthians 15, he talks about how the death, burial, and resurrection were all according to the scriptures. So very obviously, whatever convinced him to become a Christian, he ultimately got his information from the scriptures. Like he had no historical link at all to Jesus.
Except for the fact that he knew Jesus' brother James and Peter. Or how do you
Okay, well,
how do you deal with that?
okay.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah. So obviously, I don't think that the James is like the brother of Jesus. But as far as like Cephas goes or Peter goes, Paul never identifies Peter as a disciple. He only identifies him as an apostle. And we know from Paul that apostles are those that received a vision of Jesus. So with Peter only ever being a person that received a vision of Jesus, kind of makes it so that he's not a disciple. And Paul never references anybody as a disciple. Also, if Paul had gotten his information from a historical person about Jesus, like the brother, then there would be no point in him saying in Galatians 1 that the gospel he has comes from Jesus himself and not any human person on earth. Like that, he just blatantly says that there's no historical connection between his Jesus and history.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Dog's going nuts.
It's because I'm talking about this subject. I know.
Yeah, or there's a weird noise outside, so he's got to go murder it.
Grass is growing.
Shut up. Shut up. Go lay down. I love you, but go lay down. There's nothing there. I will let you outside to go look. Anyway. So here's my thing. We've talked about all these different sources and mentions of Jesus, and there's a lot of talk about Jesus. We don't have the same kind of testimony for a lot of historical figures that we do otherwise consider to be real people. We have quite a bit more than, like, again, Christians are right to bring up the whole Plato thing. Do you believe Plato was real? Like, they make a good point in bringing it up because we don't have a lot of sources of Plato existing as a human being. We have a lot more of Jesus.
No. We really don't, though. The only thing that we have is Paul. Like, we don't have tons of sources. All we have is Paul, and he's ambiguous.
All right.
Okay, so there's Plato.
So how are all these people, the authors of the Gospels, whoever wrote the original sources for those, the creeds that Paul mentions, Philippians chapter 2, the source that Thomas used, there's all these documents floating around about this person named Jesus, and none of them are talking about a real person. Did they all come from one document?
So
made some shit up.
Well, so there's Thomas, who was obviously based on the Gospels in one fashion or another, considering he was written at the end of the 2nd century. And then the Gospels, they use the scriptures heavily in order to generate information in their Gospels, but also to create narrative elements about Jesus. And they also use Paul's theology in order to create a theology for Jesus. I mean, I don't.
So where is all this coming from? Who was the first person to say, I'm going to make up this guy? And then that shit caught fire and everyone started writing about it and started going crazy.
No,
everyone started making gospels about this person. Like, how did that happen?
This is a fundamental misunderstanding that a lot of people have. And it's that Jesus is just made up whole cloth. I don't think that Jesus was made up whole cloth. As I pointed out before with Philo of Alexandria, there's already a archangel in Jewish theology that is described exactly the same way as Jesus is described later by Paul. So this figure that is the Messiah already existed in Judaism.
Paul described him that way because he was familiar with the Old Testament. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Well, yeah, Paul was familiar with the Old Testament, and Paul describes him that way because that's how the Old Testament describes him. And so I mean, Philo of Alexandria was a Jew, right?
Oh my God. Sorry.
No, I was.
Tragic story, right? My 9-year-old who's in second grade got a reward for doing good. He got a Tootsie Roll, and he put it in his mouth before he got on the bus, and like the teacher made him spit it out before he got on the bus,
Yeah.
and he's been crying about it
Oh,
ever since
no.
the show started. And I'm like, anyway, sorry, super distracting.
No, that's fine. But
Don't have kids.
well, I've got a 12-year-old, so
Yeah, that's true. Forgot about that.
but I guess just my point is that there's already this Jewish archangel that exists in the Jewish theology, as identified by Philo of Alexandria. Paul also identifies this archangel and describes him in the exact same ways as Philo does. And during the syncretization process of merging pagan, Hellenistic, and Jewish ideas together, they end up creating what we now have as Jesus Christ. And this syncretization not only happened with Philo and Paul, but also with the Gospels. That's the reason why there's a virgin birth in the first place, is because they syncretized Judaism, or the Jewish Christian religion, with surrounding pagan ideas. So I mean, that you want to know why all of this stuff got worked into the faith. It was due to the syncretization process that Christianity was put through in the first century.
So you say there's this a Yeshua Messiah figure in the Old Testament. But there was also the Son of Man in Daniel that Jesus is compared to in John.
Right.
So I fail to see how. Imagine being this sad over a Tootsie Roll. Anyway, I completely lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Son of Man and Daniel.
Yeah, the Son of Man and Daniel.
John.
So I fail to see how. To me, what I see in the New Testament is an effort to connect Jesus to the Old Testament.
Right.
I don't see Jesus being, because the claims that you seem to be making are similar to what Christians make, that Jesus is actually mentioned in the Old Testament, when no, he wasn't. The Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, is a closed book. It's done. That is the entire book. It never alludes to a second book or something else that's supposed to happen in between that book and the Day of Judgment. But Christianity comes around, the New Testament comes around, and they make all these efforts to try and connect Jesus to the Old Testament. And they take scriptures out of the Old Testament out of context in order to do that. Like you brought up the virgin birth. Did they do that on purpose, or did the author or did the translator of the Septuagint mistranslate that word? Because the word in Isaiah 7, I'm sure you know, is young woman. It's not virgin. And even still, that child in that verse is born in the next chapter. It's Isaiah's son that's born. But the readers of those gospels are not going to know that because they're illiterate. So you can come around and you write these letters that other people are going to read to their congregation, because that's how that worked in church. People who could read, and they're like, yeah, this verse in the Old Testament is talking about Jesus right here. They can't go fact check you. They can't read. So you can say whatever the fuck you want. And I think that's a big reason that Christianity spread the way it did, and a big method of, or a big tool that Paul used in his methods.
Well, I feel like we're in agreement on a lot of things. And I feel like our core disagreement here is exactly when did they start reinterpreting the Old Testament scriptures to be about this Jesus character, or the Messiah character rather. Because what I'm saying is that right there around what we would consider the turn, of the CE time period, somewhere around there, they started reinterpreting Old Testament scriptures to be about this Messiah figure, to be more about the Messiah figure. And then I feel like you're saying that it wasn't until after Jesus that they were reinterpreting scripture.
No, they absolutely had different interpretations of the Messiah and who was supposed to be what he was supposed to look like in the Old Testament, but he was never interpreted to be someone who was going to be who was going to be executed on the cross by the hands of the Roman government. That was never anyone's interpretation of the Old Testament of who the Messiah was going to be.
Well,
like, show me if it was. And that's my point.
Wisdom of Solomon.
Wisdom of Solomon?
Yeah.
How so?
Well, I mean, it's a Jewish document, right?
Yes. Where does it mention the Messiah being crucified, or
it mentions the Messiah being put to a shameful death? And it also, in the Talmud, there are two Messiahs, where one Messiah was to die, and then one Messiah was to resurrect. So
I'll look into those.
Okay, yeah, definitely do. It's Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 2, I believe. But on my GE Shorts channel, I actually put out a video today.
I can't grab it.
Oh. I put out a video on the GE Shorts channel today that kind of lays out the case for them totally expecting the Messiah to be not necessarily specifically Roman crucified, but put to a shameful death. And it's very obvious when you read like Isaiah 53 that it could easily be interpreted as being, a messianic, talking about Jesus and everything like that. So, I mean, I think that there's definitely enough material there to give these early Jews the inclination that Jesus was going to be disrespected and put to death in a shameful way. I totally get being skeptical, and I totally think that you should look into the things that I'm talking about.
Yeah, in any case, like, let's say everything you're saying is true, without me even looking into it. How is this not a literal person that was just made up? Did they just create this Jesus figure out of nothing and then convinced a whole bunch of people to start following their new cult?
Well, no. So it wasn't made up out of nothing. The Messiah figure that
I know not. I don't mean. Yeah,
Okay.
They use the Old Testament. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they said there's a spiritual figure who's not a man in the flesh, and he fulfills all these things in the Old Testament.
Did they say that he's not a man in the flesh?
Did you say? Isn't that the mythicist position?
No. The mythicist position definitely acknowledges that Jesus was in a manufactured body that was flesh and blood. I mean, I totally believe that Paul believed Jesus had a flesh and blood body. It just didn't occur on earth. Like everything that happened to Jesus didn't occur on earth. It happened in the celestial realm, right on top of the firmament.
It happened in the celestial realm, but not here on earth.
Right. How could that happen?
You know that sounds like bullshit, right? Listen to yourself.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Hebrews, which is not written by Paul, but is written around the same time.
How is it more likely this happened in outer space than it happened here on Earth, where they crucified people all the time?
Well, so outer space is
not all the time.
Outer space is.
I know I'm being inflammatory.
Yeah. Well, so you do. Let's see if we can start here. You do agree that the early Jews thought that there was a firmament.
Yeah.
Okay. You do agree that they thought that the sun and the planets and everything like that orbited around the Earth. They had a geocentric view, right?
I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah, I mean the geocentric view of things was.
You might know more about that than I do.
Okay. Well, so they did think that, and so the heavens were divvied up in different layers, right? And this is all mainstream scholarship about Jewish theology and cosmology, and so the in Hebrews, which again is not written by Paul, but is written around the same time as Paul in the first century. Hebrews indicates that for everything that is here on earth, there is a perfect copy
Hold
of it in
on.
heaven.
God damn it, John. Hebrews is reliable, but all of Paul's letters and the sources that Paul uses are not.
I
So
didn't. I
you're
didn't
interpreting
say.
you're
No, I
interpreting
didn't.
Paul's letters in the Gospels through the lens of Hebrews.
No. That's not. No,
Okay.
that's not what I'm
Okay.
doing. Now, for one thing, I haven't said that Paul's letters aren't reliable. I never said that.
No, you're right. That's fair. You just
Okay.
think that he's talking about.
Number two, I'm talking about how these groups perceived like how these groups theologies worked. So I'm not talking about Hebrews in a historical context other than what did these people believe. Okay, so that I'm not interpreting Paul through the lens of Hebrews. This is just an indication as to a more expansive understanding of their theology. So Hebrews says that there's a perfect copy of everything in heaven that exists here on earth. And so these are physical copies. These, like, for instance, in the Old Testament, you would agree that, like, when Abraham is approached by the three figures before Sarai laughs at him, those are flesh and blood three figures on earth, right? Like, within this context of the story. Huh?
To say they're flesh and blood, kind of like how Enoch and Noah appear to Jesus.
Right.
Where does it say they're flesh and blood?
Well, no, so I'm saying that within the story, it presents them as just three brosephs walking up to Abraham, like they're physical, corporeal, like beings.
Kind of like how Jacob wrestled with God.
Right.
Well, that wasn't God; it was the Spirit of God. But
well, yeah, but I mean, he was corporeal, he was physical to the point where Jacob could wrestle. I say naked wrestle and grabbed his dick, but that's just
probably.
my crude
That's
understanding.
That'd be historically accurate, yes.
Yeah.
That's how they did back then.
Yeah. So it's not a weird claim to suggest that there are physical versions of things, even people, that exist in these celestial realms as far as the Jews understand them. This is because we have direct evidence in Hebrews of the Jews believing this, or, well, early Jewish Christians at least believing this. And then we have, Paul, whenever he speaks about Jesus's body, or Jesus, being born, like I was talking about, he talks about it like in a manufactured way. He speaks of Jesus's body just like he speaks of Adam's body and our future resurrection bodies. So it seems to be more parsimonious to me that Paul thought of Jesus as having a physical flesh and blood body that was constructed of Davidic flesh, rather than being physically born here on earth.
Yeah.
Now, you can't say that I'm just like pulling this out of my ass or making things up, because
no, I'm making it up.
Okay, because I was just gonna say I'm substantiating this with a lot of reasonable evidence that this is a belief that Jewish Christians could have and probably held in the first century.
That Jesus was a flesh and blood person, but was not born.
Right.
Except, when Paul says Jesus was manufactured from a woman, how does that not born? How does that, did God use, from the seed of David even, right? So
right.
Is God taking the seed of David and making this Messiah figure in the womb of a woman? Because that sounds like being pregnant and being born to me.
Well, no, because being born is a lot different, and even Paul gives us this indication
He was
because
a
whenever
test tube
Paul,
baby. Got it. That makes sense. It all makes sense now.
the That's right,
And
honey.
wasn't a woman
It
just
would have
caught
been
with like
anyway for Mary.
didn't a woman just get caught with like 5 fetuses in her home?
Yeah.
There's 5
Yeah.
baby messiahs.
Yeah, I know, right?
Shit. God damn,
Fuck.
the end is near. They Christians are right all along.
Yeah. But no, so as far as Paul goes, what makes it more likely to be manufactured than born is actually the Greek words that are used.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Okay. Well, I mean that would be the indication that I would point out is the fact that crap, I believe is it Ganao that Paul uses for Jesus's birth, but he uses a completely different word when he's talking about other people like on earth being born. Whenever he's talking about Jesus's birth in it or him being born, he uses a different word than the word he normally uses for being born of like a physical birth here on earth. So for me, I mean that's a big indication there. Like if we're going to
Are both of
critically
those
examine,
terms used in the undisputed Pauline epistles?
yes.
Okay.
So I mean, I'm talking. I don't ever reference the disputed ones. It's just the 7.
Okay, good. 7 is correct. You passed the test.
I know my shit.
I know you do.
But so I feel like the born of a woman thing is more of a like a translation kind of thing because like I feel like the people that translated that obviously felt like, oh, Jesus was born, obviously, so it's born here. But if
Obviously.
I know, right? But I can't, like, that's one big hang up for me is how Paul uses words a lot like Adelphos with the brother. Because when Paul references people that are brothers, he does it in a different way than saying like the brother of the Lord. The word used there is ambiguous enough to where it could mean both things, and you have to look at how Paul uses the familial relationships in order to determine what he could possibly mean. Because there's this one passage, I believe it's in is it Romans 9:5. Anyways, he's talking about how he's complaining about other people being able to bring believing wives along with us, but the word used is the feminine version of Adelphos. And in that exact same passage, it also talks about the brothers of the Lord. So in that case, you've either got to specially plead for the brothers of the Lord being like literal brothers, or Paul was talking about the apostles engaging in incestuous relationships. So it's like, which one are you really going to defend? If you have it both ways, you're kind of specially pleading.
So this is where we're going full circle back to Occam's razor.
Okay.
What you mentioned how like these words are ambiguous enough that they can mean this and they could. So my question is, what's more likely, that Jesus was born of a woman and had a brother, or that he was created out of the seed of David in the firmament of heaven and had a disciple person, whatever the word for brother means? Like, which one's more likely? He was a dude that was born and had a brother, lived a life, died for saying that he was the Messiah, which wasn't weird at the time again, or that
I don't think that Jesus had like a brother in the familial, like in the blood relation kind of way. That's
what I'm saying. Like you said, that term is ambiguous enough that it doesn't necessarily mean an actual brother.
Right. Adelphos could mean a blood relation or a fictive kinship.
Right.
So how do you determine which one is which in Paul?
So James was just a
general Christian.
Even a kin in a traditional definition means brother. But I understand how kinship is used. Although I feel like the word kin being used for a friend is a fairly modern understanding. Anyway,
well, think of fraternities, and sororities.
yeah,
they call each other brothers, sisters, but they're not literally brothers and sisters.
I don't know that was a thing back then. As
it
much
was,
as it is
because
now.
that's literally the definition in Koine Greek of the word adelphos. You can look it up in Strong's Concordance. It means either a blood relation or a fictive kinship. It literally says fictive kinship, meaning it's a non-literal like blood relation.
Okay, so they were frat bros. So
yeah. God bros is what my wife said.
God bros. I like it. Yeah, so you open up another bottle or can of watered down piss.
Bud Light next. The only thing that's next to water.
Because it's got just a little bit of piss.
Bud Light next. Only a little bit of piss.
Less piss than the last kind. It's diet piss.
Yeah. Diet piss.
So yeah, what makes the most sense to me in all this is that Jesus was an apocalyptic preacher who convinced people that he was the Messiah, which other people had done before. We know this from the writings of Josephus and the War of the Jews. They believed he was the Messiah. They were going to deliver them, and then he was crucified, which they weren't expecting. This is another point I didn't get to make. Do you think that Jesus, whether he was born vaginally or had like a celestial C-section, or however that is interpreted? Joking.
Oh, okay. I was like, wait a second.
Joking,
Didn't I just lay this out?
More jokes. More jokes.
More jokes.
Do you think?
Go ahead.
Do you think that Jesus expected to be crucified?
I think that
was
Jesus
this the plan all along?
I feel like Jesus was understood to undergo a shameful death that was indicative of him taking on the sins, of everybody, and his death and resurrection would absolve those sins. It would basically destroy them.
Well, that's the theology of Paul. My hang up on that is, if you read Mark, again, our earliest gospel, Jesus does not seem to be, it seems to be very surprised that he's being crucified. It doesn't seem like he's expecting it. Last thing he says out is, my God, why have you forsaken me? But then in Matthew, he seems much more confident. And then you get to John. So, okay. In Mark, I think it is, Jesus pleads with God, my God, let this cup from me pass. Mm-hmm. In John, again, the latest gospel, he says, I must drink of this cup. Right.
Right.
So it's like Jesus was not expecting this. He didn't want this, but then they started being, no, we need to make it look like he was expecting this. And so they rewrote those words.
Well, right. But I mean, this falls in line with the crystal, I don't know if you've heard of the phrase high Christology.
Oh yeah. High Christology, low Christology.
Right.
That's very low Christology. John is very high Christology.
Right, exactly. I mean, that follows the pattern with that particular progression, but also with the amount of legendary accretion that happens in just the storytelling. Each author had their own reasons for writing the gospels that they did. Yeah. I mean, one thing that's common amongst all the gospels, I believe, is that the disciples that appear in the gospels are just fucking dumb. And
no argument here.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're dumb, and so
Jesus even says, "How many parables do I need to tell you, fuckers, for you to get this point?"
well, right, and
Free verse that is.
well,
in there,
and yeah, no, yeah, it's right around one of the feeding of the 5,000. I believe it's the second feeding of the 5,000, maybe, or between the two feedings of the 5,000 in Mark. Anyways, so with that, I mean, it makes sense that the disciples would be sad or mourning. They wouldn't be expecting Jesus because he's basically had to Will Smith slap the shit out of them to, get them to understand.
Pop culture reference.
Yeah.
Check that off the list. Done. We're doing well.
Yeah. But I mean, he's literally had to scream at them and tell them, like, look, I'm trying to teach you some shit. Pay the fuck attention, kind of thing, And so it makes sense that at least in the early gospel, like Mark, that they would be portraying it as, something that's unexpected or whatever. But I mean, I believe even in Mark, doesn't Jesus at the Last Supper knows that he's going to be betrayed. I mean, I think that's one of the things that kind of makes the Gospels incoherent. It's like, I know I'm going to be betrayed, but I'm going to totally act surprised later, kind of thing.
Sure if it's, I don't know. I know Mark's account doesn't portray Judas as being a betray. And sorry, I'm not sure. I have to look back, reread my Bible.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
I need another bottle of not piss.
Not piss. I can see you making fun of my Budweiser or Bud Light next. Now we are coming up on the hour 30, and I know that we've been talking a lot about this so far. I really appreciate you, Dadpool, for coming on and talking to me about it. I'm glad we were able to finally sit down and actually discuss this. I have to ask. We started out.
Oh Jesus!
Good. We started out this with you thinking that mythicists just sort of dismiss things, and I'm wondering if through our conversation, do you feel like I've just dismissed anything without reason?
I don't know if without reason is the best word. It's more like you have to cling to more fringe ideas in order to make them work. If that makes sense.
Like what fringe idea have I espoused?
Just
other than Jesus didn't exist.
No, just that Jesus was not actually born of a woman. He didn't actually, like, he was a fleshly being, but he was created in the firmament. Things like that almost no scholar is going to agree with.
I would need a citation for that no scholar would agree with that.
Almost no scholar. You're going to find scholars that are going to agree with you, no matter what. You could, again, there are atheist flat earthers. You're going to be able to find a scholar who agrees with you.
So why does it matter?
Because there's always going to be people out there who want to cling to fringe theories.
No. I mean, like, why does it matter that almost no scholar would agree with those interpretations of things, even though they're literally in, like, documents that are in the Bible and
because
stuff?
Because if it was an idea that was worth entertaining, more people would entertain it.
In this particular field, I mean, do you really think so? They entertain the idea that a Jew was pinned to a stick and then resurrected. I mean, they entertain that idea. I mean, the majority of New Testament scholars believe that.
Yeah, because they're Christian, but that's a different thing, because that's a dude.
No, it is. And even
that's a supernatural claim.
Bart Ehrman agrees with me on this.
Yeah.
That there's a bias in this particular field.
Oh yeah, there absolutely is. But the thing is saying that there is a historical Jesus who was a literal person that was deified after he died, and saying that he resurrected from the dead is two completely different things. That's a claim to the miraculous.
Can I ask you something? If the people that both Bart Ehrman and I agree are too biased to get past a discussion on the resurrection. They think that it's historical, and they think it's historical because of theological reasons. Those same people, do you think they are capable of even entertaining the idea that Jesus never existed?
I can't really speak for them. I don't know.
So you can't really determine that people that are theologically committed to the resurrection of a Jew in the first century.
What I'm saying is the scholars that agree with the resurrection are using theological evidence, which is not evidence.
Right.
The scholars that agree that a historical Jesus existed doesn't use theological evidence. They use the same historical criteria that they use to determine any other historical figure.
No, they don't. They use special criteria.
Do they? Which one?
Well, like the criterion of embarrassment. I mean, they use that heavily. Like you saying that the crucifixion would have been too embarrassing or is not something that they would have expected because he was shamed or whatever. That's a criterion of embarrassment, and it's incredibly broken.
Criterion of dissimilarity. No, my point is saying is if they were going to create a Messiah that was going to save them, why would they make up one that? So do you think
if they were going to make up a resurrection, why would they have women visit the tomb?
That was not historically weird. Women were caretakers of the tombs. Pliny the Younger interrogated not just women, but slave women in order to get information about the churches that were hiding at the end of the first century. So
exactly,
I know you know this. So that whole
I have the exact
that William Lane Craig uses is fucking dumb.
No, I use the exact same kind of explanation that you do for why women would have found the tomb empty. For why Jesus would have been crucified.
So do you think this Jesus was actually crucified, or was he crucified in the firmament?
I mean, I think that he was put to death, crucified in the firmament. I don't think that he was crucified on earth.
How?
I've explained. Hebrews lays out how there's the exact perfect copies of things in heaven. Paul lays out how the archons of this aeon, or the god of this world, being Satan and his demons.
Oh my God. I feel like we could go on for another hour.
I don't mean to keep going on about it. I really don't.
Me either. I'm like,
I know you got to be tired and frustrated. I guess I was just hoping to show, because I've watched your TikToks on the question of mythicism, and I feel like you have this view of mythicists that were crazy conspiracy theorists who just dismiss things without good reason or don't have good explanations for questions that historicists have. And then I also hear like Bart Ehrman spread the lie that mythicists only want to just dismantle Christianity, which couldn't be farther from the truth. I don't think that mythicism has any bearing on the destruction of Christianity. I think there's better arguments that you should totally present somebody with if you're looking to, tear down the historical truth of Christianity. I think that mythicism is a very niche topic of discussion that you should only have with people that want to talk about this particular subject. And so it frustrates me a little bit when I hear somebody that I feel like I get along with very well and I think very highly of, Captain Dadpool. I guess it grates on me a little bit to hear somebody say, oh, they're crank conspiracy theorists that only think that the Romans created Jesus. And I mean, that's just not representative of the best defense of mythicism. And my goal tonight was just to communicate to you that it's not that.
Oh, is that the point? You didn't just want to share beer and fucking shoot shit for a while? Oh,
I did. I
you had
did
an
want to do
agenda
that.
this whole time? God damn
No.
it. Never again, John. Never again. You can drink your watered down piss by yourself next time.
I'll be fine with that. I'll just rant about Jesus. He's
No,
fucking mythical.
No, when I say that, or when I talk about mythicism, it's one because I don't want people to think I'm just biased, right? Like I go after other atheists for putting out fringe theories, like the whole Jesus being Horus thing.
Yeah, I hate that.
Yeah, and that's kind of so. It's like when I attack Christianity, and I attack and I say, oh, you have conspiracy theories, or not conspiracy, but like you believe the Earth is 6,000 years old. Blah, blah. Obviously, I'm not talking about every Christian. I'm talking about the fucking batshit crazy ones who don't know how to do any scholarly research. So the same thing with like mythicists. Like if you believe that Jesus, if you believe like kind of what you believe that Jesus was manufactured, whatever. Not going to rehash that conversation. That's fine. We're going to disagree, but that's fine. My problem is what comes after that, and when the explanations, like you said, the Flavian dynasty invented the person of Jesus as a way to trick the Christians into worshiping the emperor, even though the Flavian dynasty didn't start until like the 70s, and all of Paul's letters and the Gospel of Mark, maybe even Matthew and Luke, were written before that. So that whole argument is bunk automatically. But in order to make that argument work, you have to say, oh, the dating of these Gospels is wrong. The dating of Paul's letters is wrong. So that's what I mean. Like you have to dismiss all those other things in order to make your idea work. So that's my problem. It opens the door to all these conspiracy theories that are just make the atheist community look really bad. So,
well, I mean, I agree. Conspiracy.
I give a little bit of my time dispelling those as well.
Right. And I agree that those kinds of conspiracy theories are bad, but I feel like those conspiracy theories are alternate to the strongest mythicist position, which you may disagree with the idea that there is a strong mythicist position, but I feel like two peer-reviewed books on mythicism, one agnostic, one that supports mythicism, versus exactly no peer-reviewed, at least since the 1800s, scholarship on a historical Jesus. I kind of feel like, we've got 2 points and they got none.
Kind of
thing.
No peer-reviewed.
There's no peer-reviewed, like extensive scholarship on the historical Jesus, like as far as like a comprehensive defense of the historical Jesus since I believe it's like the 1800s, maybe, or is either the late 1800s or the early 1900s. The last time somebody wrote on that particular topic.
On the historical Jesus.
On a specifically on a defense, like a full defense of the historical Jesus. Like there are certain articles in scholarly articles in journals. That's the word I was looking for. Journals. Yeah. There are certain ones that defend certain portions of it, but those have been looked at and considered prior to the current position. So I feel like most historical scholarship on Jesus is outdated at this point, and I feel like the fact that there's two peer-reviewed monographs that defending either an agnostic position or a mythicist position, I feel like there's two of those, and nobody has even tried to put out like a peer-reviewed academic book about the historicity, defending the historicity of Jesus.
Bart Ehrman's books aren't peer-reviewed?
The Did Jesus Exist book is a pop-level book that was printed or published through a non-academic publisher. So no, it wasn't peer reviewed.
I'll have to look into that.
Okay. But
how
on
about-
the Raphael Latasters questioning the historicity of Jesus, the only thing he considers is Bart Ehrman's position as far as the pro historicity position goes, and he tears it apart pretty well. Like, I mean, I'm not even through half of his look at the historical case. And I mean, he totally rips Ehrman apart, which Raphael Lataster's a historian. Like, that's his field. He rips him apart for poor historical research concerning the Q, M, and L and supporting Jesus's existence through those sources.
Okay. I'm not going to say anything more.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on here, Dadpool. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and what you do, and also about Nerds and Heresy.
Yeah, again, obviously most people probably know me from TikTok. That's where I am most. You can also find me. I have a Discord, Twitter, Instagram, all that, and I have a YouTube channel called Nerds and Heresy. I interview someone every Sunday. I've had Bart Ehrman on. I've had Aaron Robb. I'm going to be having Matt Dillahunty soon. I've had Andrew Seidel on. So some really top-notch guys that we have very fun conversations. And I'm blown away that they're willing to give me their time to do that. So yeah, subscribe, come watch. You can ask questions in the comments, and we usually try to answer them during those shows. But yeah, that's kind of what I got going on.
Awesome. I thank you so much.
I'm really
for
bad at
sharing
promoting
your-
myself. Sorry.
No, definitely do, because I mean, I think you got great stuff going out on TikTok as well as on your Nerds and Heresy, and I definitely think that people should subscribe to you. And like I said, thank you so much for sharing a beer, kind of. Oh, me a beer, or me less of a beer, you more of a beer.
Oh, it's the invisible. It's the invisible beer.
Yep.
Green screen magic.
But thank you so much for sharing a beer with me and talking about the historical Jesus. And I hope you have a great night. I hope you get that kid a Tootsie Roll tomorrow. And I guess I'll talk to you later, man.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. See you guys. Thanks everyone for watching.
Yeah, thank you, heathens. I hope y'all have an awesome night and an awesome weekend. And I hope that you'll stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.